Welcome to Alien Shadow. If you love epic sci-fi stories where humanity shines, you're in the right place. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. For thrilling HFY adventures, join us and be part of the journey. The ritual room, the walls of the alien ship pulsed with a soft blue light, but the silence inside felt like a tomb. Kyle pressed his hand against the broken console, wires sparking under his fingers. The emergency oxygen supply blinked red, and the last ration bar sat untouched in his pocket. He hadn't eaten in a day, saving it just in case, but this wasn't the kind of rescue he had hoped for. He was alone, or at least he thought so, until he heard the soft sound of breathing behind him. He turned quickly, ready to defend himself, but stopped when he saw her, a young alien girl. No weapon, no threat, just standing there with her arms wrapped around herself. She was smaller than most of her kind, her pale silver skin glowing faintly, her large violet eyes filled with something strange like trust. She didn't speak, only tilted her head and motioned for him to follow. He hesitated, then nodded, because in truth he had no better plan. She led him through dark halls, past flickering lights and collapsed beams. The ship had been hit during the last battle. Both human and alien forces lost control. Now it drifted somewhere far beyond mapped space, damaged and nearly dead. Kyle followed the girl into a chamber with strange symbols carved on the floor. The air felt heavier there, warmer, like something old had been waiting. She knelt in the center of the room, closed her eyes, and placed both hands on the symbol beneath her. The moment she did, the room began to hum. Blue lights spread through the walls and across the floor in twisting patterns. Kyle stepped back, unsure if this was safe or dangerous, but the girl opened her eyes and smiled softly. She spoke in her own language, a musical flow of sounds, and reached toward him. He didn't understand the words, but he felt the meaning. She wanted him to kneel, to place his hands where she placed hers. His instinct said no, but something in her eyes made him trust her. He knelt slowly, and the moment his skin touched the glowing floor, a sharp jolt of energy shot through him. It didn't hurt. It felt more like a memory waking up. The symbols lit brighter, and the room spun in silence. The girl closed her eyes again, lips moving in a quiet chant. Kyle felt heat in his chest, his heartbeat matching the rhythm of her words. His mind clouded with flashes of stars, fire, warmth in her face, smiling in the dark. Then everything stopped. The light faded, the hum died down, and the girl leaned forward with a soft breath. Kyle's hand touched hers by accident, and she didn't pull away. He moved closer, unsure of why, but something told him this moment was sacred. He leaned in gently, wanting to offer comfort or maybe something more. But before his lips touched hers, she whispered in perfect English, "You are not supposed to kiss me yet," she said softly. "We are already married." Kyle froze, his breath caught halfway in his heart pounding. "What did you say?" he asked, pulling back, confused and unsure. Her eyes sparkled with a mix of happiness and calm certainty. "The bonding is complete," she said. "Ritual made us one." He blinked, staring at her like she just spoke in madness. "No, wait, I didn't agree to anything," he said, his voice rising slightly. She tilted her head again, that same calm smile still on her lips. "You came with your heart open," she replied. "You touch the mark with trust. That is how it begins for us," she continued. You are mine now and I am yours. Kyle stood up and stepped back, shaking his head slowly. He checked his translator. Somehow her words were fully sinking. No lag, no errors. That shouldn't have been possible without a proper language upload. She wasn't just speaking English, the ship had synced their minds. During the ritual, some kind of neural binding, maybe ancient tech beyond human understanding. He felt a weight in his chest, a strange warmth. He couldn't explain. You're serious, aren't you? He asked, and she only nodded once. Then she reached into a compartment beside the chamber wall and pulled out a small, glowing crystal. It floated in the air and played soft images, memories. Her memories. He saw her watching him during training, listening to his voice, learning his smile. She had chosen him long before this mission ever began. Kyle sat down slowly, mind spinning. Maybe it was a trap, maybe it was all some plan to survive. But her face held no fear, no lie, only quiet hope. She walked to him, knelt beside him again, and placed the crystal in his hand. I didn't mean to frighten you, she said. I just didn't want to be alone anymore. The broken translator. Kyle sat near the cold wall, the glowing crystal still in his hand. He kept replaying the moment in his head, the ceremony, the lights, and her voice saying they were already married. Across the room, the alien girl Lyra watched him quietly. Without moving closer, she didn't try to explain further, maybe because she thought it was already clear, but to Kyle nothing made sense anymore. He opened his wrist pad and accessed the translator settings. Everything looked normal except for one strange line. It read core language, emotional sync achieved. Kyle had never seen that before, even after years of interspecies missions. He tapped to reset it, but the system refused, blinking with a single message: bond locked. His breath grew shallow and he looked up at LRA again. Did you do something to me? He asked. Voice sharp but not angry, just confused. LRA stood slowly, stepping toward him with her hands open. No harm, she said softly, only link. Kyle narrowed his eyes. What kind of link? LRA pointed at the symbol on the floor where they had knelt. She moved her fingers in the shape of a circle, then placed her palm over her chest. It joins breath, memory, and heart, she explained. It makes us know each other. Kyle stood, rubbing his temples, trying to think clearly. You mean this wasn't just some power ritual or emergency beacon? He asked. She shook her head slowly, silver hair brushing her shoulders like soft ribbons. It is for choosing a mate, she said, but not just body, spirit too. Kyle felt something tighten in his chest, unsure if it was fear or something deeper. You bonded with me without asking, he said. That's not how humans do things. LRA lowered her gaze and her voice became softer. I asked, but not with words. Kyle opened his mouth to argue, but then stopped. In his memory he saw her eyes that moment, her hand reaching out, her calm expression. He hadn't felt danger then, only a strange pull in his chest. Something about her made him lower his guard without realizing it. He sighed and turned toward the open corridor, unsure what to do next. I need to get the ship working, he said. We need power, air, food. LRA nodded and followed him without protest. She stayed close but quiet, moving with careful steps like she didn't want to upset him. They walked through twisted hallways, past broken control panels and shattered lights. Kyle reached the main engineering console and knelt to inspect the damage as he pulled open the main hatch. A small shock ran through his arm. He cursed it under his breath, then reached for the repair tools from the emergency kit. LRA knelt beside him and watched closely. Kyle noticed she was mimicking his movements, trying to learn. He handed her a small cable and she took it with both hands like it was something sacred. Why me? Kyle asked suddenly, without looking at her. LRA hesitated, then answered, "You smiled." Kyle blinked. "That's it." "No," she replied. "You smiled at me the first day we met, not like soldier to alien, but like friend." "You snort saw me," she added. "Not my race, not my skin, just me." Kyle paused, fingers resting on the metal frame. It sounded simple, but the way she said it made his chest ache. He had smiled without thinking, but maybe to her that one moment meant everything. LRA reached into a pouch on her belt and pulled out a tiny device. She handed it to him and said, "This is my translator's heart chip. It matched yours when I first heard your voice." Kyle took it, his fingers brushing hers. By accident, the chip glowed faintly. His palm then synced with his wrist pad. Text scrolled across the screen. Emotional signature, verified, dual key active. He looked at her this time not as a stranger, not as a soldier, but as someone who might have seen something real in him when no one else did. He took a deep breath and handed the chip back. "All right," he said, "we fix this ship together." LRA smiled, not wide, but full of quiet trust. "Together," she repeated, her voice a whisper carried by broken air, and for the first time since the crash, Kyle didn't feel quite so alone. Memories in her blood asterisk the air inside the ship grew warmer as backup systems slowly returned to life. Lights flickered dimly and the floor hummed. Under Kyle's boots, he and Lero worked without speaking, side by side, moving like a team that had always been there. But in Kyle's mind a storm was building. He couldn't stop thinking about what she had said about the bond, the ritual, the choice she made. He glanced at her while she secured the wiring above the energy core. Her silver hair clung to her neck with sweat, her violet eyes focused, her hands steady. She looked so calm, but Kyle's thoughts spun like a broken gear. Why him of all people? Why now? What had she really seen in him that made her choose such a powerful connection? He had to know, and he wasn't going to guess anymore. "LRA," he said firmly, "I need to see what's in that crystal." Again, she turned slowly, her expression unreadable. "You still do not trust me," she said softly, not accusing, just stating a truth. "I don't understand you," he replied, "but I want to." That was enough for her, and she reached into her belt pouch and pulled out the glowing orb again. She handed it to him with both hands, then stepped back. Kyle sat cross-legged on the floor and activated the crystal with a single touch. This time the images were stronger, clearer. He wasn't just seeing memories, he was feeling them. The crystal pulsed with emotion, and Kyle's heart pounded in sync. He saw LRA as a child hiding behind crates in a cold market. She was hungry, ignored by her own people because she was born weak, her teeth late to grow, her legs too thin. Others laughed or walked past, but she survived in silence. Then he saw her, older, studying in a quiet room, watching human recordings, her eyes always focused on kindness, especially the way humans helped each other in war zones. Then the memory shifted again. It was the day they first met. Kyle had forgotten, but she had not. He had offered her water without thinking, wiping blood from her temple after a small blast had thrown them both. His touch had been brief, his voice calm. But to LRA, that moment had lit something inside her that never dimmed. Again, Kyle felt her loneliness through the crystal like a wave crashing over him, every ache, every silent tear. Every night she curled into a corner to sleep alone. She hadn't chosen him. Randomly she had watched, waited, and hoped, not for a hero, not for a savior, but for someone who could see her as she truly was, and Kyle had done it without knowing, without effort. When the memory ended, Kyle's chest felt heavy. LRA knelt across from him, silent, waiting. He didn't know what to say, what words could match the weight of her life, her choice, her hope. I didn't know, he whispered, voice rough. LRA nodded. I know, she replied gently, but now you do. He stood slowly, holding the crystal tightly. I was just trying to survive, he said, but you were trying to belong. She stood with him, their eyes level, the silence thick with things neither of them could explain. Then she reached forward and placed her hand on his chest, over his heart. Our blood is not the same, but our rhythm is, she said. That is what the bond felt. Kyle looked down at her small hand, pale and warm against his uniform. He still didn't know if he could call it love, but he knew he didn't want to lose it. Okay, he said slowly, we're bonded. Fine, but what does that mean now? LRA looked toward the distant hallway where darkness still hid broken parts of the ship. It means we survive together, she said, and we carry each other's pain. For the next few hours, they worked in quiet understanding. Kyle found the reactor conduit, and LRA bypassed the damaged data lines. Every time their hands touched, something sparked, not just electricity but warmth. When the lights finally returned to full brightness, the ship felt less like a prison and more like a home. Kyle didn't say it, but deep inside, he didn't feel like a stranger anymore. That night, as they sat in the control room under soft orange lights, LRA leaned against his shoulder and he let her stay. She didn't speak, didn't ask for anything, just stayed there still and trusting. Kyle closed his eyes, the memory crystal resting on his lap, and for the first time in a long while, his heart stopped looking for a way out. The rescue signal, the wind outside the ship was silent, but the darkness of space pressed against the walls like a waiting giant inside the control room. Kyle stood before a frozen console, wires exposed and blinking weakly. His fingers moved carefully as he tried to reactivate the long-range beacon. His snorts had repaired power and air systems, but without a signal, no one would know they were alive. Behind him, LRA sat cross-legged on the floor, watching the stars through a cracked viewing window. Her presence was calm, but Kyle could feel something shifting. They were no longer just survivors, no longer strangers stuck on a drifting wreck. Something deeper had begun to grow between them, born of quiet moments and soft words. But time was running out. Rescue or not, supplies wouldn't last more than a few days, and Kyle refused to let their story end here. He bent over the signal relay box and tapped the final sequence. Nothing happened at first, then a low buzz hummed through the room. Console screen flickered, displaying a weak but steady pulse. Signal reactivated, he muttered, barely believing it. LRA stood and walked to his side, eyes glowing softly in the dim light. Will they come for you? She asked gently. Kyle looked at the signal readout and nodded. If it reaches them, Yes, and when they come, she continued, will they take you away from me? Kyle turned to her, surprised by the question. I don't know, he answered, but I won't let them hurt you. LRA smiled. But it didn't reach your eyes. She had seen how other humans looked at her kind. With fear, with suspicion, sometimes with hate. The bond between her and Kyle was not just raw, it was forbidden by many. She knew the moment help arrived, everything would change, but still she said nothing more and leaned against his side like she had the night before. Kyle watched the signal timer tick upward. Each second felt like a countdown to something uncertain. He didn't know how the Alliance would react to what happened here. They might see LRA as a threat, a manipulator, a criminal, or worse, they might try to separate them for good. Hours passed slowly, the beacon still pulsing. LRA busied herself cleaning the side cabin while Kyle checked every system again. He found something strange, an old distress signal embedded in the ship's core. It wasn't from their crash, it had been sent long ago. He opened the file and found a recording from LRA's father, warning her not to trust outsiders. Your heart is too soft, my daughter, the voice said in the alien tongue. Humans are clever, but they love their own. Kyle stared at the message, not sure if he should tell her, but when she entered the room, she already knew. You saw my father's message, she said quietly. He feared they would break me, but I broke free first, she added, her voice firm like never before. Kyle stood and crossed the room to her. You risked everything when you bonded with me, he said. Why didn't you wait for a safer way? LRA looked up at him and replied, because fate doesn't wait, and neither did my heart. Her words struck deep, simple and honest. Kyle reached out and touched her hand without hesitation. Silence between them was soft now, not empty but full of things unspoken. Then a loud tone echoed through the ship. Rescue ship was nearby, responding to their beacon. LRA's body tensed and Kyle stepped closer, ready to protect her from whatever came next. This is it, he whispered, no turning back. Through the narrow window, lights flashed in the dark as a human rescue vessel approached. Its markings were clear, were fleet military protocol. No room for mistakes. Kyle activated the comms and spoke quickly. This is Lieutenant Kyle Brenner, human survivor, with one alien civilian. We are both alive and unarmed. There was a pause, then a cold voice replied, prepare for boarding, weapons ready. Kyle turned to LRA, who stood quietly with her hands folded. They won't believe our story, she said. They will think I took you. Kyle nodded slowly. Then I'll make them understand. He handed her his dog tags, the only proof he still belonged to Earth. Hold these, he said, so they know I gave them to you willingly. When the ship doors unlocked and the team entered, weapons drawn, Kyle stood in front of LRA with his hands up, blocking their line of fire. This woman saved my life, he shouted. She's not a threat, she's my bonded partner. One officer hesitated. Another raised his weapon higher, and LRA, standing behind Kyle, whispered, I will not run, but I will not let them take you either. Arrival and questions. Asterisk. Kyle sat in a cold metal chair inside the Earth's fleet medical bay. His wrists were no longer cuffed, but the pressure of suspicion still wrapped around him. Across the room, behind a transparent energy wall, LRA sat alone. No chains, no guards, but the invisible barrier between them was heavier than any steel. She didn't speak, didn't move, just stared at him like waiting. Was all she had left. He had tried to explain everything, how the bond was real, how the ritual was mutual, but the officers only nodded while writing things down, their eyes filled with doubt. To them it was simple. A human soldier went missing and returned, claiming an alien mate. Worse, the logs from the ship had been scrambled by the crash. No proof, no recordings, only Kyle's word and LRA's silence. "Lieutenant Brenner," said a woman in uniform, walking in with a data slate. She wore the gray badge of a legal investigator called direct train to doubt. "You understand that interspecies bonding rituals without consent are forbidden under Alliance law?" Kyle nodded slowly, his hands resting on his knees. "I didn't know it was a ritual," he said, "but I felt it wasn't a trap." She tapped Snorts her screen and raised an eyebrow. "Your reports say the alien girl initiated the bond without explaining it first." Kyle looked up, his voice calm but firm. "She didn't use words, but she wasn't hiding anything. She reached out with trust," he continued, "and I answered." The woman stared at him for a long moment, then turned toward the glass wall. "Her race has powerful mental pathways," she said. "They can influence emotions through proximity." Kyle stood suddenly, his voice louder, sharper. "She didn't manipulate me," he said. "I was alone, dying, and she stayed. She didn't force me. She chose me." In the observation room behind them, a group of officers and scientists watched silently. They whispered between themselves, unsure whether to believe a love story or call it delusion. Kyle turned and walked to the energy wall, placing his hand against it. LRA looked up slowly and did the same, her fingers meeting his through the invisible shield. Neither spoke, but in that moment no explanation was needed. Later that evening, Kyle was taken to a private chamber for rest, but rest didn't come. Instead, he stared at the ceiling, replaying every moment they had shared. The way she had trusted him with her memories, the way she touched his hand when afraid. He didn't know if it was love yet, but it was something real, and he knew he couldn't let anyone take that away. The next morning, a new face entered the room. Human elder alien, dressed in ceremonial robes. He introduced himself as a bond interpreter sent by Lyra's people through diplomatic channels. She is of age, and the ritual she performed is sacred, the elder said. Breaking it without ceremony will damage her spirit and yours. Kyle stared at him, feeling the weight of those words settle in his chest like stone. The elder held out a thin crystal sheet. "Sign this and the bond is canceled," he said. "You will be free, and so will she." Kyle didn't take it. He stared at the glowing lines but didn't move. The elder tilted his head and added, "Or you can defend the bond before the council." Kyle looked up, his voice steady. "Then I'll face them." He was brought into the courtroom chamber 2 hours later. The walls were high, curved like the ribs of some ancient beast. Mix of human and alien leaders sat behind the podium, cold eyes watching his every breath. LRA stood on the opposite platform, quiet, her hands folded like she carried something fragile. Kyle was told to speak, and he didn't hesitate. "She never asked me to change," he said. "She didn't ask me to give up who I was. She just wanted someone to see her, not as a weapon, not as a species, but as a person." He turned toward her and took a breath. "She gave me warmth when space tried to freeze my soul, and if that's a crime, then I'll wear it proudly." The chamber remained Quiet for a long time, then one counselor stood and said, "This bond is irregular but not without merit." Another added, "We sense no manipulation, no control, only connection." They called a vote and Kyle's heart pounded harder than any battle he had fought. Then came the words that stopped time. "The bond is recognized and allowed." LRA gasped quietly, her fingers trembling as she covered her mouth. Kyle rushed to her side as the barrier faded, and she reached for him without hesitation. Their hands met, and the room around them faded into nothing. There was no victory, no prize, only peace. And for the first time since they met, they stood without fear. The choice before the council. Kyle stood beside LRA in the grand hall of the Intergalactic Council. Stone columns reached up like frozen towers, and flags of 100 worlds hung from the ceiling. He had faced war, death, and betrayal before, but never this kind of pressure. The chamber was full of diplomats, warriors, and scholars who believed in rules above emotion, and today they would decide if his bond with LRA would be honored or broken. LRA stood quiet at his side, wearing the traditional silken robe of her people. She looked smaller than usual, but Kyle could feel her strength. Every breath she took was slow, calm, like she had already accepted the outcome. Kyle wasn't calm, he was angry. Not at her, but at a world that still feared love across stars. He had seen what they had built together, and he would not let anyone tear it apart. Voice echoed through the hall, deep and cold. "Lieutenant Kyle Brenner of Earth, do you still claim this bond?" Kyle took a step forward and said clearly, "I do." The voice turned toward LRA. "And you, LRA of House Sonara, do you still stand by your choice?" Her voice was soft but sure. "Yes, I do." A screen above them lit up, showing images from their time aboard the wrecked ship, their hands fixing wires together, sharing food, resting side by side under fading lights. The council had recovered some of the ship's memory core, enough to show pieces of their bond. Gasps came from several corners of the room when they saw Kyle shielding LRA from the rescue team's weapons. And then came the moment he called her his mate. "This council sees passion," one elder said, "but does it see understanding?" A judge with crystalline skin leaned forward. "Would you leave your world for hers?" Kyle hesitated for just a breath, then said, "If that's what it takes to protect her, yes." Another voice asked, "And if your own kind turn against you?" Kyle replied, "Then they were never my kind to begin with." The room murmured, not with anger but surprise. LRA stepped forward and raised her hand gently. "If I may speak," she said, and the room fell silent. "My people have saying," she began. "True mates do not choose by blood, they choose by breath." The first shared breath in silence. "I shared mine with him when all hope was gone," she added, and he breathed back. Pause followed, and then one council member stood and addressed them directly. "There is one final test," she said. The hard echo, "It is ancient and sacred," she continued. "It will reveal if your bond is equal." Kyle looked at LRA, who gave a single nod. They both stepped forward toward the central platform, where two stones hovered midair. The stones pulsed with a dim glow, alive but sleeping. Kyle and LRA were told to place their hands on the stones at the same time. Only true emotional symmetry could awaken the core. Kyle closed his eyes and placed his hand on the stone. He thought of the moment he first saw her. Scared and alone, yet unbroken, he Thought of how she offered warmth in the cold, trust in fear. He remembered her smile under starlight, her voice trembling when she asked if he would stay, and then he felt her thoughts, not words but emotions flowing into him. Pain, hope, longing, and finally peace. The stone between them erupted in brilliant white light. The council chamber glowed with it, and no one dared speak. The test had confirmed what words could not. This was no trick, no manipulation. The bond between Kyle and LRA was real, pure, and complete. The council leader raised his hand, and the light faded into soft silence. This bond, he declared, is honored across all worlds. LRA turned to Kyle, her eyes wide, shimmering with emotion. She didn't rush into his arms. She simply stepped closer and touched his chest. Kyle placed his hand over hers. And for a moment there was no war, no law, no fear, only two souls standing in the middle of a 100 judgments, still unshaken. And from behind the council table one elder whispered, "Let love be the law today, asterisk. Together beyond stars, asterisk." The stars outside the window spun slowly as the station moved through orbit. Kyle stood near the glass, watching a blue moon rise over a distant alien world. He wore no uniform now, no badges of war or rank, just simple snorts, fabric, and a silver band around his wrist. Beside him stood LRA, her robe now a soft blend of both her culture and human design. She rested her head against his shoulder, silent but at peace. It had been 3 weeks since the council ruled in their favor. Instead of sending them back to their separate worlds, the Alliance gave them something rare, a place where both sides could meet, study, and learn. A shared research station built on unity. Kyle and LRA were asked to stay, not as soldiers or witnesses, but as living proof that bonds born in chaos could become symbols of peace. Every day new visitors arrived, some curious, some doubtful, some angry. They asked questions, stared, whispered behind walls, but Kyle never flinched and LRA never hid. They walked the halls together, hand in hand, speaking gently and answering every question with patience. They became teachers without trying, simply by existing together without fear. One afternoon, Kyle stood before a group of cadets from Earth. They had come expecting lectures on war tactics or survival drills. Instead, Kyle spoke about the silence between words, the meaning inside shared glances. He told them about how LRA had risked everything just to reach out to someone unlike her, and how he had been human enough to reach back. LRA, in her own session, spoke to alien scholars about human emotion. She described how a single smile from Kyle had changed her view of humanity. She talked about kindness with no reason, protection without reward, and when asked if she regretted bonding with someone outside her species, she smiled and said it was not outside, it was beyond. Together they planted the first cultural garden in the center of the station. One side held glowing blue vines from LRA's home world, the other grew earth sunflowers reaching high under artificial light. In the middle, where the roots met, stood a single stone, bearing both their names, not as a monument to victory, but as a promise kept. One night during a quiet walk, Kyle stopped near the garden and looked at the stars above. They say love is a battlefield, he said with a small laugh. LRA looked up at him, puzzled. But we didn't fight each other, she replied. No, Kyle said, turning to her. We fought the world for each Other, LRA nodded and reached for his hand, and we won. The station's announcement system echoed gently. Through the corridors, new arrivals from a distant system were approaching, beings that had never met humans or Lyra's kind. Kyle tightened his grip on her hand and smiled. Time to meet more doubters, he said, or make more believers, LRA answered softly. They walked into the docking bay together, wearing no weapons, no armor, just truth. Kyle nodded to the officers as they passed, who now saluted with respect instead of suspicion. LRA was greeted by her own kind, once distant, now curious and open, and in the middle of it all stood a young girl from a species neither of them had seen before. She watched them with wide, curious eyes, holding a sketch of the two from a news report. Kyle knelt down, smiling. You drew us? He asked, pointing to the sketch. The girl nodded, shy but proud. You look happy, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Kyle glanced at LRA, who leaned closer and whispered back, we are. That night they sat by the viewing dome, wrapped in silence and starlight. LRA rested her head against Kyle's chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heart. He kissed her forehead gently, and she smiled against his skin. Their story had begun with misunderstanding and danger, but it ended not in war, not in exile, but in belonging. She closed her eyes and whispered, now you may kiss me, my mate. And under the soft glow of a galaxy that once tried to keep them apart, Kyle kissed her, not as a symbol, not as a soldier, but simply as a man who had found his home, not in a place, not in a system, but in her, and together they breathed beneath the stars.